Look. All right, so we'll say, watch the upper corner. It should tell us when we're heading there. Preparing. All right. So it should be live now. All right. So welcome. This is Amelia with the Somedocs physician panel following our Tuesday night lecture series. This week's theme was storytelling. And I am joined by three of my physician colleagues. We have one more hopefully joining us here shortly. And we're going to talk about the experience yesterday, our own experience with storytelling, and how we see that in play in the practice of medicine or otherwise in our experience as physicians. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to go around and have you each introduce yourselves. Let us know where folks can find you and your experience just briefly with storytelling. And Eric, I'll go ahead and get started with you.
Okay, I am Dr. Eric Tait. I reside in Houston, Texas. Still a practicing internist, and I run an investment firm. And so we do a lot of storytelling around kind of our people's journeys to try to create income streams outside of medicine, kind of how to alleviate burnout. We tell stories around the projects that we do and the reasons why we do it, because a lot of it is not just monetary. It's also how do you kind of use your capital to put your values into the world in many ways. And so telling stories around that is a big thing for us.
And that's so important. Stories really allow us to get into the why. I love that. We'll take a little deeper into that as we go on. All right, Tracy, you're up next. Oops, we can't hear. I can't hear you here yet. Not yet. Maybe check the audio. Let me go to Charmaine briefly. You're gonna just maybe stop and restart your mic and then we'll come back.
Hello, hello, hello. I am Dr. G. I'm Charmaine Gregory. I am a night shift emergency physician. I am a burnout thriver. I am also a speaker who has a fear of public speaking, which is essentially my story. And I absolutely, absolutely, absolutely love helping people get off the fear fence and into their greatness. And that's what my show is about. That is what I speak about on stages when they let me. And that is what I strive to do when I'm not helping people in the emergency department at night.
That's really fascinating. So let's talk a little bit about that as we wait for Tracy to come back in, how you have this fear of public speaking and how that's actually become your way into speaking. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Absolutely. So I am like many others out there, because apparently the fear of public speaking is right up there, and actually more so than the fear of death. People would rather die than get in front of other people and speak. And so when I realized that I had this fear, it was kind of an interesting time because I was already finished with my training and I was out, in the quote unquote world and helping to carve, maybe not a good word, helping to mold, maybe, or perhaps cultivate the colleagues who are coming after me, their minds, and helping them to basically embrace emergency medicine and really get a sense of what it is like to practice the craft. And so, with part of my job was that as faculty was to actually get on stage and teach the residents. And so that was something that I had to do pretty regularly. And I didn't really realize that I had an issue with this until I really looked at the dance that I did every single time I got ready to give a speech. And that dance started the night before the speech. And it would involve essentially tossing and turning, not getting a wink of sleep. And then the next day, of course, we all know as high performers that whenever you are getting ready for an event, whenever you're getting ready to perform, one of the tools that are tools for success is a good night's rest. And so I didn't have that. So that was strike number one. So I get to the venue, and literally the thing that would really stop me in my tracks was what was happening to me physically. And that was my heart basically decided that it wanted to be extricated from the incarceration of my ribcage. It just decided that. And so what did it do to get out? It would literally beat and beat and beat and beat and beat and beat so rapidly that beta blockers probably would have helped. The next thing is, so the palpitations, that was one thing. The next thing that I was plagued with was essentially my armpits. Literally, there were 2 raging, torrential rainstorms happening in both of those locales. And I had to always wear a blazer. Why? Because I didn't want to offend the audience with the moisture pooling that would happen on my blouse. So I was having palpitations. I was having ridiculous revolts from, my secretions, so all of the sweat glands were like on fire. I couldn't shake anybody's hand. My palms were sweaty. And that was the physical thing. So my other part, which, we all know the mind is really the thing that drives us and really helps us to overcome whatever obstacle that may be in our path. But my mind, instead of having a can-do attitude and we got this kind of mentality, was instead playing on replay, automatic replay. Girl, you are about to go out there and you're gonna trip on the wire for the microphone. You are going to fall flat on your face. And can you say Lefort fracture? Can you say that? Can you say you're gonna break your face? And then after you break your face, all that blood is gonna be everywhere. You're gonna have blood on your suit, blood on the stage, blood on the audience. Then you're gonna try to get back up. And you're gonna slip in your blood. And you're gonna fall back down and you're gonna break another part of you. So now you have a broken face, you have a broken leg, and you have to get up, hobble your way over to the podium, and then you're gonna grab that clicker and you're gonna be like, click, 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 click. You're gonna look back. Not a single slide is gonna be on that screen. You're gonna open your mouth and not a single sound is going to emit from your cake hole. That was the dance that I was going through. And I knew that's just not normal. And so I made a decision to change the narrative. I decided that the way in which that you can face something that you are afraid of is to do that thing over and over and over and over and over again until you are now using that fear not as a crippling agent, not as a thing that's going to thwart your progress, but as the fuel, as the fire, as the fortitude that you need in order to deliver and deliver and deliver and serve and impact and change and transform the audience that you are there to enlighten, to share your expertise with, to get the feedback from. So the next time you give that lecture, you can serve the next audience on an even higher level, because now you are learning from every experience and you are transcending into something greater. You are helping them to be something greater, someone greater. You're facing your fear every single day. You're doing something that is going to set you outside of your comfort zone and put you in that place of greatness, put you in that place where you are forever transformed, where you are forever different, where you are the amazing human that you're meant to be.
Wow, pretty powerful. Storytelling to open it up here. I love that. And you help others work through that as well? Is that part of your Fearless Freedom work?
I do. Mainly, I do it through podcasting. And so I have a podcasting course where I teach professionals how to become podcasters. So they basically are stepping off of the fear fence and they're getting their voice amplified with their tribes. So that's mainly what I do. I also do public speaking where I talk a lot about physician burnout from the standpoint of someone having gone through it, and then offering solutions for physicians and other healthcare workers in how to basically circumvent it, how institutions can work with making sure that their members, their employees are not also, going through the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you. And we're getting some introductions here, and that was a beautiful one to expand into. Tracy, hopefully if you unmute, we can hear you this time. Let us know where you are, what you do, and your experience with story.
Hi, hopefully you can hear me this time.
Yes, totally.
So my projector is working today as opposed to not working. I'm an OBGYN in New Jersey. I recently resigned from a very busy practice, full-time position. No joke, right before New Jersey was shut down for COVID. My last day was February 28th. Couldn't have timed that any better. In the journey, I have taken the last several months to get my real estate license. I actually started doing real estate investing, and along the journey realized how many of us have no clue how to even begin getting your finances in order and where to begin. And so I have talked with a number of residents, high-income professionals, other colleagues, even non-medical women that are in, high-income positions that really struggle on a daily basis with how to deal with their finances, develop a budget, develop assets, develop reducing their liabilities. And so one of my biggest givebacks is the development of a course that I'm designing currently to just walk people through a very simplified step-by-step process on how to develop a sound budget on whatever income you're in and how to develop your assets and reduce your liabilities. I hear so much from so many people that they just do not have the time for it. Medicine gets in the way of a lot of things in your personal life. And I think one of the biggest things I'm grateful for is that I have had, the last 6 months kind of resetting and recalibrating what's really important. So really, I'm a new entrepreneur compared to the others on the board today. But I'm hoping to give back to those that need the help and maybe don't have the time, and make it a very simplified process so that they can be successful and then reduce the burnout and the need for this clinical income that you may be able to supplement with other things. So have a lot of similarities.
Mm-hmm. And I think that'll be so interesting to hear from you and from Eric on kind of the story behind finance, and that can really dictate a lot of what we talk to ourselves about and how we're able to narrate going forward in hearing yours, right? We look at that story structure we heard yesterday, that beginning, and you're in the build maybe phase for you. And so seeing how that works, we'll come back to that as we go through. Marlene, tell us about yourself, where you are in your experience with story.
There, I unmuted myself. Sorry. Sorry, I was late. So my journey to storytelling, I think I've always been a quiet storyteller. As a child, I was shy, but constantly, creating in my head and loved to write. And I think early on had said I wanted to be a writer or a teacher in my family, very immigrants, my dad wanted me to be a doctor or a lawyer, like that. Those were like my choices, or engineer. And so I grew up, with a very creative imagination. And I, went on the career track at 7, said I was going to be a pediatrician. And it seemed like I went from 7 to high school to college to medical school, and, lost that side of myself, the creative side of myself. And as I approach 60, now I'm 2 years away from turning 60. A couple of years ago, my form of burnout was that I couldn't take it anymore. I could not take one more person that was a non-physician practice. Skinny, we're not used car sales persons, not about, I know when I'm taking good care of people, and it's not often not be done volume if you want to do it well. And so I knew that I could not continue to be employed model, and wasn't ready to go into the direct primary care. I'm fascinated by the deep sea, living in rural Pennsylvania. I moved from New York City and the Hamptons, and so I just decided my internet. I was going to switch to my other. Can you hear me okay? Actually, if I switch to my other computer, that's what I was doing before. Can you hear me okay or not?
No, it was choppy, and then we got a fast forwarded version. So if you want to swap,
we
want to
having
hear your
trouble with our wireless. But anyway, I decided to become a storyteller for other storytellers, and founded a magazine. So this is my project, my baby. Oh God. I'm going to switch computers because I know that it was really choppy before listening. So let me switch computers, and I will keep listening to you.
In just a moment. Thank you. What I wanted to talk about from yesterday, this would be so good. Physician Outlook is the magazine Marlene's referring to, and she's going to show us that in just a moment. And as Dr. Coriel told you yesterday, you can get that first month subscription free when you're through Somedocs. So we'll look at that in just a moment. One thing I wanted to talk about before we come back to Marlene is the idea of impact. And for those who tuned in yesterday, that story opened powerfully, right? So you were in it, you felt it, viscerally, literally, figuratively, all of that. And what has been your experience with how to use impact? And Eric, I'm going to come back to you, especially in the finance realm, how you can really relate to people and maybe show them the importance by utilizing the impact of story in your engagement.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the world revolves around stories, right? And so the most important story is the story that we tell ourselves, and getting people to begin to examine that, right? The thing about it is, a story doesn't have to be true. A self-narrative that you tell yourself doesn't have to be true to be debilitating or empowering, right? And so how do you get out of the inculcation that you may have been given from your religion, from your race, from your gender, from your sexuality, right? How do you've experienced the world in a certain way, you tell yourself certain stories about things, right? And all of that comes from kind of where you come from. And the big thing I always like to talk about with our investors is kind of money psychology, right? Because each of us has a psychological relationship with money and a story that we've been given towards money. Whether you grew up with it, you grew up without it, and that it completely subconsciously creates the actions that you take in your life. In some ways, you have to walk people through their own money story first. And a lot of that is the deprogramming that rich people aren't evil. Yes, you deserve to be, all of those kinds of things, right? And not everybody has it, but many, many, many people do. And I see many, many women specifically have it a lot as well. And so how do you create a new story, a new narrative? How do you flip the I would say societal narrative around that, right? The person who really kind of opened my eyes to that from a story standpoint, and it was a very short story, right? It was actually Robert Kiyosaki, and it wasn't in any of his books. It was just in one-on-one, because I've taken classes with him and things of that nature. And he talked about it. He said, listen, everybody pillories wealthy people, right? But who's really greedy and who's not? Is it the person who has one house, one 401k, one stock portfolio for themselves? Or is it the person that has multiple houses that they provide housing for other people, that put money into multiple businesses so that people can become employed? Like, who really is the greedy one, right? Who is the one that really cares about others, right? And what stories do is stories reframe paradigms for people, right? I could tell you something all day long, but if I wrap it in a story, the paradigm will often change. And the thing about it is, stories allow people to put themselves in it and then see themselves through it. And anytime you're doing persuasion, anytime you're doing anything that is taking people from where they are to where they say they want to go. People say all the time, I want to do this, but they have mental blocks around actually doing it. And so they will have to literally put themselves and imagine themselves in the situation with a new paradigm for them to then be able to take the action. And that's what story allows to happen.
Yeah, I think that's so important, that opportunity we have to keep writing it, right? We're not ever stuck with one narrative. It's so powerful. Marlene, it looks like you're back on, and we missed some of the middle there. We did hear the end. You're talking about the magazine that you founded, and we heard that you kind of started out with your imaginative childhood.
Yes.
Is there any
yes, and
you want to fill in and share that magazine? Yeah.
Yeah. So I a few years ago just decided I could not continue to practice in a traditional employed pediatrician model. I was employed in rural Pennsylvania, which we love. We moved from New York City and the Hamptons. I've lived that life. I have a very interesting story of what I loved about the Upper East Side of Manhattan and what attracted me to the Hamptons. And it was the 9 months of the year that the fancy people weren't there. And getting to know people who just salt of the earth people, like just, we wanted to raise, our daughter was 6 when we decided to leave, and just wanted to raise her in a place where she could just have good values, not know what Uggs were, not know what an Apple Watch was. And just, not that she didn't get those things, but I just didn't want her growing around that. But so moved to this great place in Pennsylvania where the salaries are crazy. People always talk about it's so hard to attract doctors to rural America. I mean, that's where the life is. We're able to own a house on 5 acres, whereas, we were like living paycheck to paycheck in the Hamptons. I still live paycheck to paycheck because I need to talk to you guys about how to manage my money. But I just had this dream that I wanted to storytell in a way that made physicians and their families feel good about themselves again. Because it seems like, especially in the last few years, COVID was a kind of a highlight. At least people looked at us with, some honor, some respect. But I'd say in the past decade, we take the brunt of a lot of negative. My bills are so high, and you doctors are so hard to get into. And I wanted us to be able to tell our part of the story. And I wanted it to be beautiful. I didn't want it to be like another burden. Like, I'm sure you all, I don't know if you still get journals, like I forget to unclick the box. And so I'll get these like huge piles of paper magazines, and I take them on vacation with me. And I just like to, catch up on stuff. But I wanted this to be light reading, beautiful reading, and mostly physician created, and not, I didn't want it to be filled with pharma ads. So pre-COVID, I had this huge marketing plan that it was going to be like an airline magazine, where it was going to be great destinations, beautiful shoes, great clothes, like startups that that had just neat things, highlight physician-owned businesses and books and stuff that doctors and their families liked. And then COVID happened. And so it's been an interesting journey over the past year, because no jobs for physicians, not a lot of travel, not a lot of anything. But it's actually been, a blessing, because I think it's let me focus on what's important, which are the stories, and beautiful art has come of COVID. I don't know how many of you have seen the magazine, but it's all the covers are physician created, or the back cover of our last one is actually the doctor's look at this 7-year-old art on the back of this cover. And I love finding stuff like this, and I comb Facebook for it. And my dream is to actually get the paper magazine into the hands of our colleagues who are not listening to podcasts, not engaging on the internet. I know they're out there and they're not 80, they're my age and younger, who just say, I've had it, I don't want to be on social media. I'm just gonna work and retire, or work and just keep working and let the man tell me what to do. They're not self-employed for sure anymore. So I'm hoping that once this COVID ends and we're allowed to have magazines in waiting rooms and back in hair salons and barber shops and nail salons, I want this to just get picked up and spread person to person, like that direct marketing, where somebody shares it with someone, and hopefully it'll be a movement and highlight what everybody else is doing, because there's so much of it. Every time I turn around and somebody else is doing great things, coaching or designing scrubs or designing shoes or selling real estate, or helping people out with finances. So that's my goal and my dream, and I'm so happy to have met Donna and then now you guys. And I'm a lurker and I'm terrified of public speaking. So Charmaine, I watch your stuff and I'm like, oh gosh, how does she do it? Because I hear myself talk, and I keep saying to my business partner, I'll be a guest on any podcast, but no, you're not going to get me to make videos or be a podcaster. No.
Well, here you are live on the video, and Charmaine shared that she started from a place of fear and converted it, right? Transformed it into her fuel. So it's totally possible.
Yes.
What an opportunity to bridge both of those, right? To utilize social media to say, I have this magazine and I want you to send it, right, to the people aren't on here. And so we can kind of intersperse and really reinforce that network in a new and profound way. And I want to move from those stories. This is a great opportunity from your magazine, because they are often patient driven, at least, or inspired perhaps, stories. And we had that question come up yesterday, and I don't know that it was answered maybe as sufficiently as we would like. And I'd love to hear from anyone who has utilized stories around patient care or told them in a way that does seem secure, respectful. I can think of a few examples, but if you've done that yourself, or have you seen it done well, where we utilize physician stories in a meaningful, impactful, respectful, and legal way, if we're talking about it in that realm.
I just gave a talk to the Michigan College of Emergency Physicians for a summer series. And the talk was essentially about the impact of COVID-19 on us as physicians, but also on the patients and the patients' families. And so I had a story for each one of those sections. So it was basically Star Wars theme, of course. And it was broken down into 3 episodes. So the first episode was basically the story of, she allowed me to utilize her story, but basically it was a nurse who was caring for a young person who had been hit pretty intensely by COVID and had a bleed. She was bleeding from her nasal passages, and she was essentially being treated like a leper. And so that really brought to light the stress on us as staff on taking care of patients who have this particular problem. Now, there was limited availability of, us being able to go into the room. And this is someone who was continuing to bleed. So she was having a really rough time. There was some barriers to getting our specialist colleagues to assist us in getting the bleeding to stop. There was definitely some friction between the physician and the nursing staff, because normally what happens is that the nurse is going to be the person that is going into the room multiple times, whereas at least I can speak for emergency medicine. I can't speak for anything else, but for us, really what happens is, we have like 20, 30 patients and the nurse has like 5. So, they're able to go into the room more frequently, and they're more on top of what's happening with the patient. And so now you're saying, I'm sitting there with my N95 mask, my surgical mask over that, my shield, my goggles, my protective gear. And I'm asking my nursing staff, and I go in there like once or twice, maybe at most. And I'm asking my nursing staff now, because you have a critical patient, for them to keep going back in there with all of this gear on, and then having to deal with the effects of that, because you're talking about recycling your own CO2. You're talking about the temperature change that happens underneath all of those garments. You're talking about, your eyes getting foggy, your goggles getting foggy, the whole deal. You're feeling like you're going to be essentially going to syncopize at any moment from just being in there for a little bit. And so the toll of that, like reconciling the fact that you have a young person who is having a huge problem because of this virus. And then on top of that, she has another problem that potentially can be life-threatening, because yes, you can bleed to death from a nosebleed. If it bleeds long enough, all bleeding does stop. And sometimes that stoppage is a terminal one. And so, keeping all of those things in mind while the nurse is having to keep going in there, and you're kind of steering the team, and then being mindful of the things that we say to our colleagues. So in this particular scenario, what ended up happening to this nurse was the physician said something along the lines of, just why don't you just go in there and just hold pressure on her nose, which, obviously was not the right thing to do. But that was an illustration of a situation where, you have an added stressor on top of the fact that, they're endangering themselves every single time they go in there. So I use that for the physician part, for the team part. And then I used the case where a family member actually, and I asked permission also for this, she actually thanked me for taking care of this daughter. Came and she was like, you know what? I know this may sound very unusual, and I know you may think I am, this is just out of left field, but I am actually glad that my dad fell. So her dad was an elderly gentleman, came from a nursing home. He fell out of the bed. He was demented, so he was in a memory care center, and she had not seen her dad for months. Like literally, she would see him through glass at a distance. She has not touched her dad's hands, hasn't run her fingers through his hair, hasn't felt the warmth of his skin, hasn't felt his breath on her face. Like she hadn't experienced that. But she got the opportunity to do this when her dad fell and came to the emergency department, because now he's in the emergency department, and we're currently at a point where we can have at least one visitor back. And so she was able to come back. She was able to talk to her dad. She was able to be next to her dad. She was able to hold his hand, stroke his hair, make him feel loved. There's nothing like having your loved one be there for you. There's so much healing in that. And I know you're probably like, what are you talking about? You're an emergency doctor. Like, how much time do you have with your patients? But I love old people. That's the first thing I'm going to say. I love them to death. I see a lot of them at night. And, it just really breaks my heart when I see them and they're by themselves. Their loved ones aren't here. And so when she told me that, I said, you know what? I completely understand. I know you didn't want your dad to be hurt, and thank God he was not. But I am actually happy that you had these moments with him, because we're not promised tomorrow. We have no idea when our time is going to be up. And so it would have been horrible, because I've had a colleague literally lost her mom during this time and was unable to spend those last moments with her mom. She had to look at her through glass. And that is the worst part of all of this. And so, I think if you craft the story in the framework where you're not, it's not a violation of HIPAA if you make it more, you basically make it more than the specifics of the case. Now I get it. You may have to talk about, the acute renal failure that's going on, or you may have to talk about, the lactic acidosis or whatever have you. but you can change it. You can craft it such that it's not going to be so specific that, you know, it's identifiable, that patient's case is identifiable. And I do realize that in particular in my line of work, there are some cases that are just like, wow, one of a kind, like, wow, you know, that thing that doesn't happen anywhere else. Like that particular situation happened to that person. And if I said that thing, they would know exactly who that is. Don't use those stories. Use the ones that can be transposed to other people. And so that is going to help you to have really colorful stories, because people really want to, no matter what you're teaching, you could be teaching acid base. And Eric, I'm sorry if you love acid base, but I'm not a fan. Okay. I'm like, okay, what's the pH? All right. Well, okay. What I need to do, that's basically the extent of it for me. Now, if you're going to be explaining something like that, or you're going to be digging deep into something like that, you want to have a story. We had a case where this gentleman came in and he was just doing those Kuzma breaths were just on fire. And, you know, we went over and we leaned over him and he had that ketone breath going. And, you know, I just had to, and I was just waiting with bated breath to see what was that acid base going to be? Like, what was it? What was his pH going to be? Like, what was the gap going to be? That's how you make the story exciting, even if it's a topic that is usually not exciting to some people.
I think you illustrate a key point that it's different than the instructiveness. And I don't want to interrupt you, but I just want to highlight that it's different than when we're lecturing, right? And I think we need to step out of that because as physicians, we're so often in that space, and bringing that engagement through the story, especially if it's in a non-clinical setting. But we can also use, right, you said that powerful story intro, if you are going to give a lecture. You know, there are ways to really draw people in to really be thoughtful and listening from a different space when you can utilize story. And it doesn't have to necessarily match all the clinical details, because we may not be telling someone, here's how you manage this case. We're bringing through the spirit and the sentiment and the human connection there. And that's where story can really emerge, even in those one-off cases. You may not even need the details of the clinical piece, but if you can boil it down to like, what actually happened here? Why was this so meaningful to me, to them in this moment? And I want to make sure I didn't cut you off if you had a closing statement there, Charmaine. No, that was so beautiful. And I'm glad you're speaking to this in these different settings, right? So people might not expect that to be what they are receiving in an emergency medicine kind of review lecture, but you bringing this power to them and seeing, right, how those late night visits could actually be so meaningful and personal, especially in this time. And Marlene, are you going to have
just a brief story that my daughter is 20, does not want to be a physician, but wants to be in the medical field. So she's working at a nursing home now. First experience really direct patient care. And she was all through COVID, home from college, working part-time. And my husband used to be a big smoker. Another blessing of COVID is that he's terrified of getting sick. So he quit his 40-year smoke habit. And she's like, Mom, where did you hide Dad's cigarettes? Or do you have any left? And I was like, why in the hell would I give you cigarette? You know, like, and I couldn't understand where she was coming from. And she's like, one of my residents asked me if I could bring her a pack, and I can't go buy them. I'm not 21 yet. And I'm like, well, I think you can buy them at 18 and nobody checks, but again, come again, because I knew she's not a smoker. And it's that they don't let any residents go outside of the nursing home unless they're smokers. And so this little old lady asked her, can you bring me some cigarettes? And she said, you don't smoke. She goes, but I want to go outside. I haven't been outside in so long. So my daughter was like trying to like figure out how to get her a pack of cigarettes. And she would just fake smoke so she can go out. And she talked to I said, why don't we do this? You talk to the activities manager. There is no way that sounds like a rule that needs to be broken, that she should be able to go outside and enjoy some fresh air. She's like 91. So that reminded me of cute little old people stories.
Oh, that's beautiful. Tracy, I want to check in with you and see what you're feeling around the ideas of impact, how to speak about patients, and perhaps in this time when you've stepped away for a bit from clinical medicine, how you see some of those experiences maybe come through in a new way when you're not inundated with it daily. Do you see any of those stories come through from your past experience?
Definitely. You know, I think there's two sides to the storytelling. And I think sometimes even for myself when I'm practicing, or when I was practicing, I think people really appreciate even when you share with them something personal that happened to you. And I think sometimes we get so lost in the details of getting through the visit and task mastering everything we have to accomplish in, 15 minutes. And so I like to sometimes just take a breath and just sit there and say, so, tell me what you're feeling. Tell me what's going on. Cause I don't know about you, but right now, like my kids are driving me crazy. And, I came home and the house was a disaster. And I feel like when you just take that moment to have a connection, a human connection, patients just totally open up to you. And what's really been fascinating for me is that since I've stepped away, I really, in the moment, didn't feel very appreciated, but it wasn't until I left that I really understood how much you bring to the table for people and how patients have graciously poured out so much, you know, thankfulness. They've sent me letters. They have called. I've got the operators from hospitals calling, looking for where I am. And so, a lot of people during COVID were finding me on Facebook and LinkedIn and saying, I hope you're okay. I hope your family's fine. And it was like a 360 where people were actually worried about me, where all this time you feel so drained at the end of the day that you're giving everything to your patient and you feel like there's nothing left. And this time of being home for 6 months has really made me realize that there was definitely, I needed to take some time in my day and just take a breath and say, I have great patients, we have a great connection. It's not just about, what script do you need? What labs do you need? What's your results? And you make that connection with people. And that's something I actually miss a lot. But I'm finding it in other ways. And so I find that COVID has really isolated a lot of people and made them feel very out of touch with each other. To speak to Charmaine's, story about just wanting to touch a family member. And so I think the piece of human story, just to circle back to your question, is really that sometimes it's not just about your patient's story, but sometimes your patients want to hear your story and they want to know you're just as human as they are. And I think a lot of times patients don't think we get sick. They don't think, something can happen to us in quite the same way that we seem to come to work looking like we've got it all put together, when in fact, maybe you left your coffee on the top of your car because you're rushing out of your house because your kids barely made the bus, and you're lucky if you got lunch boxes packed. I'm so glad we don't have to make lunch during COVID because my kids are home now, but they're home. So, those are little things that I think when you talk to people, they really start to identify that you are human as well, and you're making mistakes and you're navigating through life, and maybe not so good some days and maybe, great others. And I find that you connect with people so much better that way.
Yeah, I think that's so important to remember, and maybe to see if we can find the appreciation in the midst of it. If we can take that step back, even when we're still in the thick of it, and especially right now, reframing that for those crazy moments in the house, in the chaos, and see that there still is appreciation in that medium.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the stakes and shadows. That was some of the concepts Marion brought up yesterday. And, what are the stakes we have when we're telling a story, and what are some of those things kind of painting the intrigue around it? And if you found that, if we're sharing a little bit of our own stories or those we found with our patients or with our clients or with the projects we're having, has anyone had experience with that? How in telling the story, it's really about noticing what we do have invested, what we maybe have to lose or to gain in that experience? I'll leave that open if somebody wants to step in.
Yeah. I can talk about that because the point of, there have to be stakes, right? There have to be the story has to lead you to overcoming something, right? If it's not, it's just, hey, I went fishing today. It was great. I caught all the fish possible in the world. And I went home and had a great burger from McDonald's and then I went to bed. right? There's nothing there, right? There's no obstacle. There's nothing that's going to come over. And so there has to be within the story, especially if you're going on a persuasive kind of story, there's got to be consequences to non-action. And some of those consequences are just status quo, right? Chances are people are listening to you for a reason. And if nothing happens, what changes? If you do nothing, what changes, right? And so ultimately, it's, if you look at the kind of the story brand structure, they talk about it, it's the salt, right? Use just a little bit of it. Don't use a ton, because nobody wants to be, a Debbie Downer, but there have to be consequences to inaction. There have to be consequences to the status quo of where you are, to the point to get you to do something differently. People will, we all know the stats. People will do 4 times more to avoid pain than move toward pleasure. And so you've got to give a little bit of pain somewhere in there in the story structure, in the process, even if it's just a rhetorical question that needs to be asked during the process, that pain has to come up. The pain of inaction has to come up for anyone to move off of their spot, usually.
I'm curious if you've utilized that with patients, so we think about like motivational interviewing and access, if you're able to tap into that in a way where you find their true pain points, because they might not be shared. They might not be our pain points, right? But we can find the ones that might drive them to action. I think that's so beautiful. There has to be a consequence to inaction. That's so powerful.
Yeah. And just add back to the patient side of it. The biggest thing is, at least for me, is emotion and feeling, right? The clinical course is the clinical course, right? When you're talking to residents, whoever, the thing I usually try to do is try to pull the emotion and the feeling out of the moments, right? What is it? What is not being said, especially in the patient interview standpoint? Like, what is it that's hanging out there? What is the real fear, right? And so once you can get to the real fear and unroof the real fear, say it, unmask it, and then alleviate it, right? Because people have fears. Again, same thing, right? It doesn't have to be true to be debilitating. Patients run around all the time with fears in their head of something going to happen. Like, yeah, that's not that disease. You're thinking of this. No, this is this, and we'll fix it like this. And then all of a sudden they get their test done, or they did whatever the case may be. And so really unroofing the unspoken fears, the unspoken emotion, that's really from pulling their story from them, is kind of how you get them to do the next thing, or whatever it is, because they have all manners of misconception about what's going to happen down the road that you can alleviate. Or you can just say, listen, yeah, that's going to happen, but we're going to do, this is what's going to happen to mitigate those particular types of things. So.
Mm-hmm. So helpful, because we often think they're not motivating. We can't even rationalize, well, it's such a simple thing, but they have a whole different dialogue going on behind that. Anyone else on stakes and shadows, how to use it personally or with patients? Yeah, Marlene.
And it's been a while since I've been in direct patient care with patients, but this is a family who gave me permission years ago, very low income family in East Hampton, lived in a trailer park. And I knew this mom would never stop smoking. She was, lifelong grandmother, great grandmother. But I did ask her to partner with me and just smoke outside. She needed a break. She had 2 very rambunctious boys and an 11-year-old with low self-esteem who just ate constantly and was heading towards her mom's path. I think had already probably tried smoking. And I said, just do me a favor, don't even cut back, but just go outside and smoke, because it'll be healthier for the kids. And I knew she wouldn't have as much time to go outside. So I didn't even think she'd follow my directions. And then I get a call from CPS in the New York folks that I needed to and she had some trouble with neglect and, teeth and throughout the years before I took care of them. And I called the worker and said, please call me back about this family. And I didn't even call the worker. I called the mom and said, what's going on? And it was a week after our visit. She goes, I hate you. I hate you. I'm never going to speak to you again. And I was like, why? What happened? She had a 4-year-old. So she's like, well, you told me not to smoke inside. So my 11-year-old decides to go to school and tell her teacher that she's Cinderella, that I make. She goes, do I look like a clean person? Do I look like I would make my child clean my house? And she was always like dirty clothes and smelly and stuff. So she was pointing out her own. She goes, on what planet does this teacher believe my daughter that I was making her clean the house? Like, she's like, no, I told her to clean up her room. But because she told the story about how I was, forcing her to clean her brother's rooms and mine, I get some worker coming to my house. And as if she wasn't bad enough, my 4-year-old tells the worker that my mommy leaves me alone for long periods of time. And she's like, I don't even have a car. And it was that she was going outside to smoke, and to a 4-year-old, a smoke break outside the door was a long period of time. So they were ready to, like, I stood up for her. I, called the worker and said, no, this woman is trying as hard, she could use some parenting help. She can use, but, I had gotten to her to engage, and, she actually didn't end up hating me. We worked together. We got children in, it was CPS, Child Protective Services, then, to actually offer some, babysitting course for the 11-year-old who, so it went, and I've used that story throughout the years to show that I try to partner, meet you where you are. It's often backfires, but I'm always going to stand. If you're trying to take care of your kids, it's not going to be by the white person's book that says this is how you raise children, or I told you to stop smoking, how dare you not? Like, let's meet somewhere, and if there's a misunderstanding somewhere, I'm gonna help you. So that's my
And story can, so interesting, it can confabulate it, right, for how the 4-year-old and 11-year-old presented it, but also bring it back around. It offers clarification when we stay with it, and we're willing to work through that middle zone, right? That kind of act 2 of the stories. Anyone else on stakes and shadows? They're coming towards the latter end here, or any stories that have been meaningful to you that patients have brought to you, and perhaps even in this time, especially in the time of COVID, on the vulnerability of physicians. Tracy, you touched on that patients both want to know that we're human, but also a little bit that we're not, right? And we've seen in COVID the most healthcare workers lost, during the course of this pandemic. And what does that mean, for us as physicians seeing one another, and also for patients to say, oh, right, they're not totally invulnerable to this process. Has that come up for you on how to balance being human and superhuman and at the same time in your roles through story?
Yeah, I mean, I think to speak to something Marlene mentioned earlier is, we're always, we've been looked at in the wrong light, I think. And COVID has, I hope, brought the healthcare field into a more positive light, that it's not easy to do what we do on a regular basis, putting COVID aside, but adding that on top of it. And I think seeing some of the photographs and media, although they're hard to watch sometimes, really is depicting what's really going on at ground zero, so to speak. And I hope that it puts the value back in medicine that I feel a lot of us have felt devalued. And so I'm hoping that the good that comes out of this, and I always try to look at why are we experiencing these things and what's possibly the good that's going to come out of it, is that we end up having a different light shed on our profession, and that we're maybe a little bit more appreciated. And in that aspect, hopefully that helps to reduce some of the burnout that we're all experiencing, because the profession needs people to stay in this long term. And, I'm not in a point in my career where I should be retiring. And so after leaving 3,000 patients behind on, very short notice, and trying to figure out how to regroup, I'm struggling with where do I fit in the medicine equation. And, I know a lot of colleagues are feeling very torn about, should I be home right now with my family who really needs me, but I have this obligation with work, and I have an obligation to my patients, and I need a paycheck. And so, how do we all make that work, and yet still feel like the hours that we put in, the time and the energy that we put in, is appreciated. And so I think COVID has kind of shed light on that. If there is a positive that comes out of this, I'm hoping that we're just more appreciated all around.
It's such an interesting point. And I was listening to a podcast today with Brene Brown on burnout with two non-physicians who are the authors of this book, and talking about completing the emotion cycle, as a way to get through the stress and stressors that we face. I think we're seeing a lot of this here, and story can take us through that, right? Story can kind of be our guide, because sometimes we get stuck in that middle phase of the story, and that's a tough place to be, and being able to walk ourselves through, the final chapter might allow us to step in to the next series, and for you, Tracy, like noticing that, okay, where am I now? I'm kind of completing that emotion. I'm moving through some of that burnout phase and ready to step forth. And I agree with that. I hope we can keep so many of us in medicine in a sustainable and meaningful way. And I want to make sure everybody gets a moment to just share any final closing thoughts, and also let everyone know where they can find you to continue these conversations, obviously in Somedocs, but your own personal sites, channels, handles as well. So I'll go back around one more time, and I'll come back to you, Eric, to start the closeout. Any final thoughts and where we can find you?
So I just want to thank you all for having me on. To thank Donna and Amelia. Thank you for organizing all of this and keeping us updated and giving us all the information in terms of what we would need. Just kind of to piggyback on the last portion, what I am heartened in seeing is physicians, I think, are reframing and in some ways becoming more chastened that the profession kind of is what it is. There's a romanticization that we all, and I may just made that word up, that we all get coming through medicine in terms of the Oslers and those people, in terms of what the profession was. And I think we end up creating an internal disservice for ourselves to hold ourselves to a standard for a profession that no longer exists in the way that it once did. So it's a profession where we no longer have any autonomy, but are expected to be the captain of the ship sometimes and not others. And so that creation of massive cognitive dissonance is, I think, has led us to where we are, but I think COVID has reframed a lot of that with that understanding, because so many of us have died and so many of us have been sacrificed with the realization that we are cogs in a machine in many ways, which in the end, let's be clear, all labor is a cog in a machine, right? So we're not special in that specific way. And so I think that on the other side of this, considering the massive amount of onslaughts that physicians feel from, scope of practice creep to, large corporations and their expectations, to not feeling like you can be in your own practice because of the kind of financial situations of all of those kinds of things, that the reframing of where the profession sits in our ego and what space it occupies as it relates to who we are and how we build our identity is being reshifted. And that's a good thing, right? And so the more we can pull the profession out of who we are, we will always be physicians, right? But it doesn't solely define who we are. We were individuals and peoples before that. If we lost our medical degree, we would still be individuals and people after that. And so kind of a reordering of what it means to be in this profession vis-a-vis our own internal egos and how we build our own esteem, I think post-COVID is going to have a revolution. So I think that's going to be a very good thing from that standpoint. And so just for me, connecting with me, I tell people all the time, I'm infinitely Googleable. I'm pretty easy to find in a ton of different doctor groups, but it's Eric Tait, last name is spelled Tait. You can reach me at eric@vernonville.com, which is VERNONVILLE. We also have a physician kind of services platform that creates kind of how do you create a life balance wheel in medicine. It's free. We don't charge anything on there. It's just, we have a podcast there. Just how do you order yourself in medicine? And that's just called The Physician's Road. Go to thephysiciansroad.com. We have a lot of different kind of free resources on there to help physicians with kind of ordering that ego and that esteem outside of just being a physician.
Excellent. Thank you. Charmaine, let's have your closing thoughts and where to find you.
So that was so eloquent. I was like, wow, it's really awesome. I was like, yeah, I never thought about it like an egocentric portion of it. No, that's fantastic, Eric. So for me, I can be reached first of all at Charmaine Gregory MD on all of the social media platforms, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, etc. And it's CharmaineGregory, M as in man, D as in dog. And the podcast that I was referring to, that was part of my two-pronged approach to facing my fear of public speaking, is Fearless Freedom with Dr. G. And you are always welcome to come on the show and become a guest on the show to talk about your fear and how you can emerge victoriously from it. And the podcast is located at Fervently, FERVENTLY fit.libsyn.com. And I don't know, I am just very excited to have been chosen. I was like, oh my gosh, I got chosen for a panel on Somedocs. That's so awesome. So thank you for having me on. And I appreciate you for listening to my stories.
Thank you. This was great. Marlene, any closing thoughts and where to reach you?
So my closing thoughts is that I am so glad I made the time. I don't know if you guys have noticed, I do a lot of things in my life now to make ends meet. My easy job is as a college physician close to my home, about 30 miles from my house. And I took that job exactly last semester, started in September. It was easy up until about the end of January when COVID hit. And but I feel like God moves the chess pieces in the sky, and I am where I'm supposed to be. So I have zero time to do the magazine during the day. I'm a hotelier, moving suspected COVIDs, and kids are kids, they're partiers. I'm so proud of this young population because it's a party school, St. Bonaventure, but we've only had 2 parties. They both got shut down, and we're 2 real cases since we started in September and still having in-person classes. So we are proud.
Mm-hmm.
So my closing thought is that's that's the job that pays my base salary and my benefits. And then I do telemedicine to supplement that. And I've been doing Doctor on Demand now for a few years. And as a pediatrician, like I have no business seeing adult males, especially. And so I finally got myself pediatric telemedicine. Has not been a big growth, but if any of you have kids, I can't recommend enough. It's called Blueberry Pediatrics. And I just started working for them. And a lot of it is texting families back, and they send pictures. And that way I can multitask. I can listen here, but I've gotten like 4 calls in between here. That fits my lifestyle. With Doctor on Demand, I literally had to have a white coat and for 8-hour shifts, not move from my desk. That's no fun. I was going to burn out of that. I love kids, love families. And then my third passion is my magazine, and I need all the help I can get. It creates itself. So please send me stuff. I want to hear more about what each of you are doing and highlight it and share it with your networks. And dovetailing on what Eric said, my passion is also to not sound like these crotchety older doctors. Our next generation we have to help them on a path that lets them imagine themselves as the greats. Not these, I feel like the medical profession, they just want people who just say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, and do what they're told. And we need a little bit of that fire that makes you say, no, I'm going to do what's right for my patient. I don't care what it costs. I don't care. We'll deal with the prior auth later. We're going to take care of you now and not lose that passion because ultimately, and then look at it from a societal point of view. How do you let that happen to all sorts of groups of people? So this telemedicine, $15 a month, 15, for no matter how many children you have. And it's 24/7. So if you have an anxious mother or father, you can text 100 times in a day. It's the same price. So it's a direct primary care version of telemed. And I'm so happy to have been hired. Now, at $30 an hour, when I get my first paycheck, I'll tell you if I still like it. But for now, at least I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, that's so amazing. Great resource to share. And Dr. Coriel's putting that up in the thread as well. And agreed, the new generation is giving us a lot of hope on how to hold boundaries and start to shift the systems. Tracy, I want to give you a chance just to let people know where to find you, and if you have any final remarks, and then we'll wrap it up.
Sure, thank you. So first, I just want to say thanks to Donna and Amelia for hosting. I came across Donna at a dinner at Capitol Grill many years ago, and somehow we've crossed paths again. So I'm excited to be helping her on her journey. I'm just starting my entrepreneurial journey, so I would love to hear from those of you that are in need of assistance for financial reasons, or if you're interested in getting involved in real estate and to some degree, I'm happy to teach you and share with you what I've learned, tax strategies, how to invest, how to find a property, how to be hands off, how to design things your way. You know, I hope to have some kind of a course formed in the near future so that I can make a very easy platform for people to be able to just focus on having more balance in their life, especially if you're working ridiculous hours and don't feel like you have the time or the energy or the wherewithal to know where to begin. One thing I did hear on one of the podcasts that I found very striking and just kind of stayed with me is, as physicians, we're taught to raise the bar and keep raising that bar, but we never stop and say, oh, I got the bar, I grabbed it, I made it, I accomplished something. We tend to get the bar and say, okay, now we got to push it up even higher. And so I'm going to hopefully help some people grab the bar and say, I did it. And look what I did, and take a breath and look around you and say, you know, I accomplished an amazing, you know, task that I maybe never thought I could do. And so hopefully we all get to raise the bar and enjoy it. So
Absolutely.
thank you for having me on.
Thank you all. I have two quick questions. Marlene, they'd like to know where to find you. Where can they send you information or contact you?
So on Facebook is where I'm most comfortable and active, although I'm going to take Donna's Instagram course because I understand that's where the action is. So Marlene Smith is my personal Facebook, and Physician Outlook is one of my pages. And you can find me, my email is Wust-Smith, no R's, no dots or dashes. So MWUSTSMITH at physicianoutlook.com. And on Twitter, I'm at both Marlene Smith or Doc Marlene Smith and Physician Outlook.
Excellent. And Tracy, I have your email. I can put that up in the thread as well. And I want to let everyone know you can also contact one another through Somedocs. There is a networking session live on Sunday. It's at 7 p.m. Eastern. So if you go into the group, you can find the details for that and join in. There was one just recently. It was really well received. It's a great way to connect and really talk on a personal level and learn what everyone else is doing. And for me, Amelia Albiki is my personal name. I'm also at This Osteopathic Life, mostly on Facebook, also learning Instagram, branching into it, and always in Somedocs, and happy to be here with all of you. Thank you for taking your time. And we'll continue these panels each week following the lecture series to get the physician perspective after learning from our experts. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
My live stream is stopped. Thanks so much. This was great.